It's time for our second Nordic game conversation in the program. Let me introduce you to two real legacies in the industry, talking about legacy and innovation in gaming, navigating the tug of war between tradition and progress. Please welcome Adam Boyce, co-CEO at Iron Galaxy Studios, and Alexander Bergendahl, CEO at Loot Locker.
Hello, everyone. How are we doing today? Good? You got your belly full of Swedish meatballs, I hope? Awesome. Here for a good chat, aren't we,
yes,
Alexander?
Very much so. Thank you for joining us as well, Adam, coming all the way from the US for this.
Yeah, all the way from Chicago.
There we go. So I have the great fortune of being able to talk to someone that I've admired for nearly my entire career in games. Adam and I met was it 14 years ago, something like that?
But yeah, I think, or 15, yeah, sure.
Gets always longer. Back when you were running publishing at Capcom US, and we were at Grin. I was just early in my career in QA at Grin, working on Bionic Commando. And you came, spent a lot of time in Stockholm, and a lot of time with the team trying to whip us in shape. I got to sort of see you do your thing, and then from there, and we'll get into that in a sec, watch you go off and do more stuff in your career.
It was a highlight for me personally, being able to spend a bunch of time in Stockholm and get to know many of the phenomenal developers throughout Sweden. It was a low light in my marriage because my wife was pregnant at home with her daughter while I was gone for 7 months. So you can imagine what that did for our relationship. Good news is my daughter's 15 and she's stronger than ever, so it worked out okay.
And talk about legacy, you know, having kids and showing them good work ethic as well, maybe. Or bad, depending on who you ask. So I think before we start, I think it's good just to sort of gauge the audience a little bit. So we're curious to see a raise of hands if you're a game developer. Can you raise your hand?
Game developers.
Oh yeah,
right,
great. Students, a few of them. Do we have any publishers here? No publishers, great, so we can shit on them.
They're hiding.
Yeah. And any investors in the house? Nope, one? All right, great. So mostly developers for us to speak with. So I wanted, before we get into the main topic about preserving legacy, fostering innovation in the games industry, I wanted to sort of talk about your background a little bit and just sort of provide a little context to why I think you have a relevant experience to talk about legacy and innovation. You've been in the industry for over 20 years, right?
28.
28 years. Oof.
Even though I only look like I'm 25.
Exactly.
So,
you started like me in QA.
Yeah, exactly.
And then have climbed the ranks to Midway as an executive producer, director of production, like I mentioned, at Capcom, then to Sony, where you were VP of third-party relations.
And the developer technology group. It was a long title.
Yeah, I couldn't fit that on my notes. And now you are the co-CEO of Iron Galaxy. One of the biggest, or the biggest co-dev in the US?
I think we're the biggest independent co-dev studio in the US, yeah. We have almost 300 people across Orlando, Nashville, and Chicago. So,
wow.
Yeah.
That's a lot. And I think this is really interesting because what you've been able to do in your career is touch on, you were, obviously QA, which I always think is a great entrance in the games industry. You really learn about how games are built. But then being at a third-party publisher like Capcom, then being at the first party at PlayStation, and now running a game studio. I think you've got sort of done the full gambit there, at least.
The trifecta.
The trifecta, yeah, exactly. So I think I would be curious then, given that perspective and given this challenging time that we're in here in the industry, maybe you could warm some of these developers' hearts, give them a little bit of context about what's happening in the industry right now, and given that you've been in the industry nearly 30 years, calm the storm a little bit, help them understand how we've come to this point. I think we just passed 10,000 layoffs this year, which means that we've already halfway through this year beaten last year's
It's horrible.
Sad numbers.
Yeah.
So maybe you could provide some context for that.
I mean, I'd love to say like we can hire 25,000 people, but unfortunately that's not the case. It's sad because anything I say right now about the state of the industry, it's just, there's people suffering right now. There's friends of ours, there's peers, there's colleagues that currently are out of work, or their studio's been shut down, or they've been laid off, and it's really frustrating to me to see what's happening. If we put a little context though, like 2008, there was also a big downturn. I think from a percentage perspective, and this is like where you get into nerdy business math, which never sounds good because it sounds a little bit like you are broken from the impact of it, but about 5,000 people lost their job in 2008, but the industry was about 1/10 the size. So I think by modern day standards, that would be about 50,000 layoffs. So the problem is when you say that the downturn is smaller than 2008, it doesn't matter because the context is the people are getting impacted. I think it's one of those things that happens when we obviously, COVID was massive for gaming, for playtime, for spending. And so many of these big publishers sort of built like that was going to sustain forever. You know, you think about the role of a CEO at a big publisher, your job is to feed the shareholders more money and stocks going up. And so you have to sort of plan, best case scenario, you sort of put that line up. Now, unfortunately, I think spending came down a little bit post-COVID. And so I think there's a big correction happening, which in my opinion is an overcorrection. I think the layoffs don't actually reflect the reduction of spending and stuff like that. And it's just sort of a sad time. It's a sad time to be a developer. It's a hard time to find funding. It's a hard time to be building middleware. But the good thing is that the same, if not more, people around the world are still playing games and still spending money. And so, you know, I like to say that this too shall pass. And even though this next couple of years is going to feel rough for a lot of us, and I really hope that all these people stay in our industry, because I think having a brain drain of 25,000 people leave the industry would be heartbreaking, right? A lot of people put a lot of blood, sweat, and tears into what we do. So we're hoping they can find something that can at least pay the bills. Or at least come back at the end when it starts to sort of swing back. Because I do think in the next 12 to 18 months, I think we're going to see a big swing back, a lot more investment coming in, a lot more capital injection, which I think will be really good. And the good news is gamers are going to keep playing, and awesome games like Hades 2 or Volatile or Helldivers 2 are going to keep doing well, coming from sort of smaller studios. So I'm very bullish on the future. I think the problem with that, again, being a co-CEO, is that when I say I'm bullish on the future, there's still people that are impacted. And that's always that juxtaposition that's really hard. You know, as a studio, we try to do a lot of hiring, but at the same time, we need to be the right size for the market. And so I always wish that we could just be like, open up studios in places that were affected. But the reality of it is that balance. So yeah, I'm excited for the future. And especially when I go to conferences, talk to tons of different people. One of the benefits of having that job at PlayStation is I got to sit across the table from a lot of executives in the industry at big publishers. And now I sort of look at them and just go, well, what are you doing? Do better. But you know, I think in general, the feedback I keep hearing from them, studio heads, developers, is that there is new money sort of coming in, and so I'm hopeful.
Good. We should all be hopeful, I think.
Yeah.
Do you think we've learned from this? I mean,
no. Late stage capitalism never fucking teaches us anything. We just keep doing the same shit over and over again. I hope so. You know, I think one of the biggest lessons is just the reliance on these big organizations to represent the heart and soul of what we do and the art form. I think is it's one of those things that, historically speaking, if we go back to the start of my career, when a developer would beg to get a publishing deal, they'd have to give up almost everything. Maybe they get 1 or 2% of the revenue once it's recouped plus 200%. Nowadays, I think publishing deals are a lot more fair. So we see a lot of developers that can sort of exit that, you know, exit into the stratosphere and be able to be self-sufficient. And I think the more self-sufficiency there is in our industry, I think the better off we are in many ways. I think there's always going to be a role for the big publishers and the big platforms to be supportive, but I think it's a little bit, it would be a little bit naive for us to just rely on them for safety and security. I think we have to become more self-sufficient as an industry and rely on one another and potentially other sort of like ways, other capital vehicles. Mm-hmm.
So then going back to the sort of subject of the talk here, tradition and legacy.
Sure.
Like what is, very, very briefly, what does that sort of mean to you? We actually just had another panel earlier today about this. I think maybe we're getting to that age of the industry where we can actually start thinking about legacy. But what does it mean to you as someone that's been around for so well?
I mean, you leave a mark every job you have. I always say to people that are currently in their job and they're facing a frustration or something like that, you know, you're bigger than your job. You have a career in front of you. You have your whole entire legacy in front of you. And I think one of the biggest lessons I learned early on, it took me a while, was that, you know, you treat people with respect. One of my coworkers, Carter, has the best saying, which is be pleasant and be present. So when you meet someone new and you're talking to them for the first time, just to make good eye contact. We talked about this we're at the Reboot conference in Dubrovnik and talked a lot about networking and meeting new people, and a lot of it is that respectful interaction. Hopefully most of us are here because we love games, and I think that's really, really important. But when I look back, I also can reflect on the mistakes that I made through my career and different stumbles that I had. Right? I think about sometimes I was a really shitty boss and I was passive aggressive and I was like, if you don't work late tonight, you're not part of the team, right? You sort of think about those things that you did and you said. And one of the things I think as we age up and as we grow and evolve in the industry and we reflect and we become a little bit more vulnerable with our age and you know, talk about our mental and physical health problems that some of us are facing, it's important because then we're able to build new environments for the next generation. One of my favorite sayings from Dave Lang, our founder at Iron Galaxy Studios, is he wanted to build a company that paid for the sins that he both experienced and partook in the industry. So I think each of us can be doing better as leaders and as new people to not only choose companies to work for that reflect values that we have, but also for us to be able to build organizations, build teams, and build products that also reflect those values and leave a legacy. I always think about, I'm not as excited about what we're doing at Iron Galaxy. I'm very excited about what we're doing, but I'm more excited about the next 10 people that spin out their version of Iron Galaxy and how they sort of like, you know, elevate it to the next level, because we're very focused on culture and values at our company, and that's our kind of our superpower. And so I just am so excited about what the potential future holds with young devs that are going to build the next generation of Iron Galaxy and beyond. Yeah, and I think that's also like sort of the silver lining of when you go through sort of a recession for the industry where you see a lot of layoffs, is that we hope that people take this as an opportunity to go and start a company and to, you know, right the wrong that they felt that they had seen. I know Christopher Sundberg, this is the ex-CEO of Avalanche, at his talk, keynote talk at Reboot in Croatia last month, talked about how this frustration of seeing how people were running companies that he worked at led him to start Avalanche. Yeah. And like you just said, maybe people that are being laid off from these bigger corporations will take this as a moment to try to build a company that they want to see and take some of the values that they think are important to them. And there was two things that you mentioned just now that I think really resonate with me as I've gone through my career. The first is the word relationship. Yeah. And you know, even going back to your time at Sony, it was in your title. And I always felt a really important turning point in our industry was when you walked out on stage at E3 with all those indie studios behind you, showing this relationship that you had built with all these studios and the effort that you put in to build this positive relationship. And I think we live in such a small industry that having these relationships and being present and being pleasant really means that you build these bonds with all these people that you work with or that build games beside you. And you know, over your career and as you build your own legacy, those relationships come back, and if you've done a good job, come back in a positive way. And then the other term, word that you mentioned, which I thought was really interesting, is vulnerability, and the idea of being, you know, honest and self-aware about your own shortcomings. And I'm curious, you know, what have you done at Iron Galaxy that you know, fosters that honesty, and how have you tried to make sure that people feel that in the company? Well, I think part of it is radical transparency, right? Being honest with people, modeling the behavior, talking about your own journey and your own failings as a leader, as a manager, as you know, my career. When I look back, it sort of flip it back to the first part of the question on the relationship side of things. I remember, so I grew up in a smaller farm town in Canada, and I wasn't taught a lot of fancy things, didn't go to any fancy schools, and so it was very sort of basic level of understanding of relationships and just do what you love and work with awesome people. But when I joined Capcom and I had the privilege of being able to go meet with developers, it just kind of came naturally that I was like, before I meet a developer, I want to finish their last game that they made. And it was funny because for me, that was so natural. Like, just obviously you finish their game before you meet them. That's the least you could do to show respect for what they've done. And then you go to a studio and they're like, you finished our game? You're like, yeah, I know exactly, like that one bug on that one level. They're like, you finished the whole thing? And some of these games we're talking 50, 60-hour games are not as long as they are these days, right? I'd still be playing Factorio, I'd be like, got 950 hours into it. But that was the first inkling I got of like, just being a fan of the art form and being, spending that time meant that I was showing them that I care about what they do. And that was just, I was like, I thought it was natural. And so when I went to PlayStation, I realized that a lot of developers had felt commoditized by the platforms, right? When you try to get someone on the phone, an account manager to get some help, get a dev kit. And I sort of did a big analysis with our team and I realized that my predecessor really focused just on how much money each partner brings us. And I was like, that's not what's important. What's important is how developers feel when they work with the platform. And so we changed the rule set to not, we're only going to treat the most important people, the most, bringing the most revenue in, but we're going to actually, everyone that comes through the door, whatever's important to them is important to you for the next hour. And that sort of methodology change and giving away free dev kits, I think, is how you sort of seed that. And that, I think, was a time and a place at PlayStation. I think at Iron Galaxy, what I've learned is when you're managing a large group of people, for a long amount of time, I've been there 8.5 years. It's been an amazing journey so far. And you have to meet people where they're at. You have to talk to them regularly. Myself, Chelsea, and Dave, or my 2 other partners, we meet with every new employee one-on-one, or in groups of like 2 their first week. I think that's super important. I talk to a lot of CEOs that are like, you meet with every person? I'm like, how would you not? How could you not? They're working for you. They're committing their phase of their career with you. We do town halls where people submit questions, and sometimes they get spicy, but that's the part of it. If you're always transparent, you're always honest with everyone, then you don't have anything to hide. And I think that's super, super important. And like I said, modeling it during COVID, I think we all took a massive L as a world and as a society. It was really, really difficult for a lot of people. So we had some mental health sessions and some sort of group therapy sessions. And part of it was us starting the call off by sharing our own trials and tribulations, whether it's my bout of depression that I went through or different people sharing about their vulnerabilities. And once you do that, and once you're honest with yourself and with each other, then that sort of sets the standard that it's okay. My work with this awesome coach, her motto is it's lonely at the top. But in reality, it's lonely for all of us in every position we're in, right? As managers, first-time managers maybe, first time, in a new role, and you're like, how did I get here, right? I've had literally, imposter syndrome my whole career. Every job I've ever had, I was like, what am I even doing here? But you realize that you're surrounded by people you care about, hopefully working on products that you care about very deeply. And so that allows you to sort of center yourself a little bit. And as long as sort of I always say it's okay to have a bit of chaos in your life. Some people have more than a bit of chaos, but because you can always go back to things that center you and bring that sort of you back down to earth. Yeah, no, I can definitely agree on the feeling lonely as an entrepreneur. You feel this quite a lot. You're going out raising money, you're getting a lot of no's. You don't really know what else is going on. But the more you share and the more you talk to other founders, you realize, oh, they're just going through the same thing. Yeah. And when you're even at the top of a company, if you share how you're feeling, yeah, people, the people in the rest of the company often feel the same way. Yeah. And you realize that you actually have something in common there, and it isn't something just about being a leader. Yeah, you don't have to be an emotional tank your whole life and never talk about your feelings. And I think there's a lot of, gender things that go into genders with that too, where there's expectations. Mm-hmm. And I think breaking those things and just living your true self is super, super important. Being, honest and I think is critical to success, and also just letting the steam go. Sometimes I think people feel like I'm a bit abrasive because I'm pretty honest all the time, and I sleep very well at night, and often at times I'll give context, so we'll talk through why I said it the way I said it. I think that's a very important thing too. When you're talking to someone about something that they said and how it impacted you, oftentimes, you attacked me earlier today, Alexander. How could you have said that? And I'm like, what do you mean? When you say to someone, though, when you said this, it made me feel that. It's such a powerful way to phrase it, because now you can't argue with it, right? When you said this, it made me feel that. Mm-hmm. And so even just talking to one another in these situations is really, really important. How we position things, how we talk about things, and how we sort of try to become better true selves, I think is really, really important. Yeah, no, so talking about the good things that we want to
bring forward into the future. But what about some of the bad things? You talked about your previous boss at Sony, which treated everything sort of transactionally. You know, are there elements of this industry that you feel like we kind of need to overcome and try to leave in the past?
Yeah, I think it's a big part of our industry, or any industry. This isn't just uniquely for video games, but there's shitty bosses everywhere. They walk among us. Might be some here in this room. I hope there isn't. But the reality of it is that, you know, through your career, you're going to see trials and tribulations. You're going to work with people or meet people that you don't like the way they conduct themselves. What I always think about long term is I just don't want to work with them. That's kind of simple, and it sort of is self-selecting. But the other part is, you know, you have a choice to make. You know, you have to either try to work through this situation and understand it and live with it, or you can leave. I always hate that option when people are like, if you don't like it, you can just leave. I'm like, oh, yeah, but that's not the way we should be. We should be wanting, we talked about legacy earlier, we should be wanting to make the organization better and the team better and the game better, so that the way the sequel and the next thing they build is even better. But sometimes you get smacked up against that manager. Or in my case, one of the jobs I had earlier in my career, I was that bad manager. I was treating my boss really poorly, and I was being sort of like verbally insolent, and then I was teaching my team really bad habits around that. And when I look back, I finally could reflect and be like, I was a horrible, horrible person. And then you go, oh, it's because I was depressed and breaking up with my girlfriend and all these different things. I'm like, doesn't matter. What matters is I tainted the culture of a company and of a team. I was a bad manager, bad leader, and my personal life allowed that to sort of infect like a disease. And so now I get to reflect on that, and I can sometimes see in others when I see someone start to turn, the venom suit starts coming on. I'm like, hey, I've seen that before. I've been through it myself. So I think a lot of that is just being aware of what you're going through and what you're facing, and then just being able to compartmentalize it. Or I need some time. I'm having a bad week. You know, I like the idea of having caveats at the start of a meeting or the start of a presentation, just so you know, couldn't fall asleep last night. The melatonin didn't kick in, so I only got 3 hours of sleep, so I'm a little bit tired. I think it's okay. It's okay for us to be honest and to share with one another, because it allows us, I think, also to connect more, right? Honesty to me is super critical, especially as a leader and as a manager.
Does our industry give people second chances?
I'd like to think. I think it depends. I mean, there's so much nuance in that. It's a loaded question for sure.
My job. You
know, I think I like the idea of redemption, right? I don't think anyone that does one bad thing should have to go away. I mean, unless it's hyper extreme. But I think it's also about who you surround yourself with, right? People keeping you in check, friends, colleagues, mentors that can sort of help support you, like you said earlier. Talking to other people, sharing, and then be like, hey, by the way, the way that you're in that meeting the other day, I could see the impact it had on other people, right? Because I think a lot of times the lack of self-awareness is what triggers or can manifest into really bad bosses. And I saw them at the highest level of some companies where you're like, how on earth? And you go, wow, they just sort of bullied their way up the chain. And you're like, all right, well, I'll just, I know at least what I'm dealing with, right? So I'd like to hope that. I think it's all in the eyes of your peers and the other people around you, right?
Interesting. So you mentioned late-stage capitalism being something we can't avoid.
It's here. It's here to stay.
We all, I'm sure everyone here saw this interesting trailer for the new iPad that Apple released, where they crushed all creativity down into a piece of glass. How did we live in an industry which is exceptionally creative. The reason that I am in this industry is because it's, I think, the epitome of artistic creation and storytelling. And it hurts me to see such a big company that is so close to our industry. I mean, Apple has created a platform that a lot of us have released games on, potentially mistakenly demonstrate that they're crushing it. How does that make you feel, and is there a way that we can avoid this type of thing happening to our industry?
Yeah, I think it is tough, because if we look at the way that I think some of the publishers and platforms have been treating studios lately, it's kind of I think, a bit problematic. Like, we need to be giving people chances and again, hopefully creating that safety and security. But then on the flip side, I walk around the halls of Nordic Games here, and I see so many incredible games everywhere. Like, I remember when I used to walk around back in my PlayStation days, 12 years ago, and I'd go to shows, I'm like, that's a game? You're like, that's, but here it's like there's fucking game-ass games everywhere as far as the eye can see. And so to me, you see that creativity, and that creativity is going to continue. So I think the analogy used of crushing all the dreams and the tools, I think the inverse is true. There's so much access now to engines and tools for people to build their own thing on their own or with a small team of people, and that's incredible. If we look at the last 10 years, how many massive breakout successes have came from the big companies? Maybe one, maybe two, right? It's mostly coming from small teams that are, navigating unfettered through the wilderness and building really cool stuff. Sometimes they get funding. Sometimes it's for someone else that's backing it or the IP is owned. But like, that's where the creativity is coming. So I think the big companies are going to big company, right? Late stage capitalism is going to do its thing. But in the end, I think that that wonderful, fruitful labor and the passion in the industry is never going to stop. And the more proliferation we have, I mean, I remember my kids showing me the different games and experiences they were building in Roblox when they were like 8 and 10. I'm like, I wish I had game tools when I was a kid. It'd be amazing, right? So instead of just wanting to be a streamer, I think it's important for people to be creatives and build things and learn a trade, so that way they have something they can utilize their whole career. It's one of the big things I say to a lot of young people when they're like, I just want to be a streamer. I'm like, learn how to make games and also be a streamer on the side. So that way, the streamer thing doesn't work out, which it probably won't, because you don't have PewDiePie's, Riz. But, then you could pivot back to an actual trade and make stuff. Because I think making stuff is a pure expression of our industry.
Thank you. Thank you for saying Riz on stage.
Yeah, I had to. My kids made me.
Yeah.
For you, Parker and Ellie.
So we've spent a little time talking about tradition and legacy. The flip side of that is progress. Yeah. What does the future look like? And how do we build studios and the industry to survive these ups and downs that the industry goes through? We've heard a lot of people say this now. I think overspoken word, a quote of "survive to 25." Without using that term, what can studios do right now? What can these developers in this room think about right now to weather this storm?
Yeah, because then the follow-up is don't get nixed in 26, right? That's
is that a new one? I'm already late.
25 is already, no. It's. I think part of it is you got to pay the bills, right? That's the hard part. You have to take care of yourself and your family, right? Whatever expression of that means, right? So I think that's important. So I think some people have had to do side hustles or pivot the vision for their company in the short term, but knowing that they can come back to it. So I think that's really important, is just looking out for yourself and the people around you that you care about. Also surrounding yourself, and understand that a lot of people in the industry want to support you, even though they might not have checks that they can cut. There's a lot of, I think, emotional support throughout the industry. And I ran a couple of roundtables at the DICE conference, and we talked a lot about vulnerability, and we talked a lot about challenges and trials and tribulations, some companies going bankrupt, and what impact that has on not only, of course, the employees' mental health as they get laid off, but obviously the leaders' mental health too. So I think it's really just about being resilient. I think it's because when we come through this, you're going to be stronger than ever before. I remember I started a company called Beefy Media, and I did a project. I was making a Sour Patch Kids video game with Kraft Foods, which is kind of weird.
This one does.
Yeah. Creed from The Office did the voiceover, and Method Man made a music video for it. Super weird. But I remember we got to the alpha build, and I sent the alpha build to Kraft Foods, and they were like, this isn't very good. And so we might cancel the project. At the time, I started my own company. My daughter was 2, I think, at the time, and they were basically threatening to shut down my company. I remember that feeling I had in my gut of like, this is the worst it could ever be. Like, I'm going to lose everything, lose the house, the roof over my house. And I remember going back to my wife and I'm saying, listen, I think I can fix this. I think we can get it back on track. We did. We shipped, and I think they promoted on like 500 million packs of candy, which is kind of neat. But more importantly, I turned to my wife and I said, listen, with the mortgage we have, the worst case scenario it'll ever be for us is we move back to your hometown in Saginaw, Michigan, and we pay off a house fully, and I'm a Subway sandwich artist. And that's the worst it will ever be for our entire life. And so level setting of like what the bottom can look like, I think is super important, because then you go, okay, so everything's pretty gravy on top of it. And so creating that juxtaposition, making sure you understand what your support structure is, what you need to pay your bills, and looking out for yourself first, I think is really important. But it's tough. Like we can't sugarcoat it. Can't say, hey, if you do this, you'll just be fine, right? It is a slog right now, and so it's just hopefully this too shall pass. And with that resiliency, or with the support of your friends and loved ones, I think we can all get through it together.
Yeah, and you talked about pivoting, and pivoting is something that I think a lot of people link to some type of failure,
Right.
and I think that's definitely incorrect, right? You running Iron Galaxy, you guys have recently, or not so recently, you pivoted when you had a game that was canceled.
Yeah.
Can you share a little about that so that people understand that it happens to even the biggest of companies?
Yeah. So we're, like I said, almost 300 people. We work on very large projects all around the world. We work on, right now, working on Call of Duty. We're working on Apex Legends, working on 3 projects for Riot, working on a bunch of stuff for Activision, for Microsoft. So we work on very large AAA sort of codev projects. But we also do original stuff. We made a game called Rumbleverse, which was a 40-person brawler royale, where you could elbow drop someone off of a 40-story building and just make a big meteor crater. It was super fun. And our publisher, Epic Games, after 6 months, decided to terminate the agreement and to no longer support the game. So it reverts back to us. By the time we had, 90 people that were on the project. So all of a sudden, overnight, not overnight, you have some months' notice to figure it out, but trying to pivot that many people to new things overnight is very, very challenging. And you have to build the communication strategy, and this is where it's going to sound, people might roll their eyes, but like it's important of like who finds out in what order to make sure you do the proper planning and everyone feels safe and secure during the process, because we never laid off a single soul because of that, and that was over a year ago. It came offline, I think, a year February, so a year in 5 months or 4 months. And I'm really proud of the fact that we didn't lay off a single soul because of it. We pivoted a lot of people. We started doing Roblox development. We started building location-based entertainment. So we're doing rides for Universal Studios, which is kind of wild. We're doing like some AR and VR stuff, and then also talking to some Hollywood studios about doing some previs and stuff like that. So even when you are as large and as established as a company like Iron Galaxy, sometimes in hard times you got to figure out some ways to freestyle, pivot, and try new things in order to create that safety and security for the people.
And a lot of that, I guess, came from the relationships that you've built over your career, being able to call them up and have that trust with some of them that you could say, hey, do you have any work? Can you help us out? Do you have any ideas? Yeah,
a little bit of that, and a little bit of just like, hey, wait a minute, where are some maybe, margin insensitive verticals that you could play around with and try out. And also part of it is just like, I remember sitting down with my son when he was about 10, he was playing Roblox all the time, and I was like, nah, Roblox, and
not real games.
I just spent 30 days with him. Every day we'd play for an hour, and it just like blew my mind, because I was like, this is what he understands now. And that made me rethink about like, why do we keep going like as an industry, like, can't believe, angry person yelling at cloud. Instead, let's dive in, let's be curious. I think curiosity is super, super critical in our journey, to always be asking questions, always be wanting to learn new things, even when it does seem like that's just the popular thing. And I do that whenever I see a game going like super nuclear. I was like, I gotta play it, because I'm like I remember hearing the term auto chess, and I was like, chess? I hate chess. But then I was like playing, like, this is good shit. I love auto chess games. But being able to understand, I think, what's happening is important too.
Mm. So we mentioned that there's a lot of people being laid off, tragically, and hopefully the silver lining is that they start a studio. Is it even a good time to start a studio right now?
I think that's, again, a trick question, because there isn't a lot of funding per se, but I think it's always difficult to start a studio. Because, first of all, finding that team, committing to one another, having a vision for what you're going to build that is special and unique. I think dialing in your pitch and your vision to not only try to attract people, but to try to attract potential investors is really difficult. But like, I give so much respect to the devs that are here right now, hustling at their kiosk, having people demo the games, and they're just going, 10 hours a day, and they got their, I will watch video demos in bars at Mellow Yellow, and people are like, yeah, then this is how this works, and it's so inspiring for me. And I think that hustle is real. It's part of our industry, part of the culture. And so I don't think it's ever, like I said, the right time. But if you have an idea and you need to get it done, and scratch that itch, I think that's absolutely critical. Every time I've ever done something that was a bit risky, I never regretted it, right? When we talk about legacy and about regrets, I don't really think about regrets in my life. I always think about made a decision, moved on. Living in Chicago, we're big in the improv world, and Second City's based there, and they have this term called yes and. So when you're doing a skit and someone's doing a little bit and you go yes and, you're adding on to it. And that's sort of my philosophy in life too, the yes and philosophy, because you just go, I'm gonna try that and see where it goes and never sort of look behind me. Because the things, we can't really control the outcome, we can only control the input, right? The way that we're going, and I think that's super important. I think another thing that's important is just doing a check-in with yourself of how you're doing in your career, how you're feeling about the project you're doing. Are you feeling inspired? I read this incredible book that has these 3 things you should check for. You should sort of do a health check on your psyche every couple of years at your company that you're working at, or if you're running your own, and just say, like, you know, do I have a path to mastery, right? Am I learning something every day that's making me better? Do I have autonomy to make decisions in my world to impact my work? And then the third one is a vision, like passion. And a vision.
Sense of purpose.
Yeah, sense of purpose, right? So where we're going, that sense of purpose. And I think if you don't have all 3 of those, that's okay. You're only usually gonna get 1 or 2. But the moment you have 0 of those, that's when I think it's time to reflect and figure out maybe this place isn't for you and you could try something new. Because again, you're just gonna learn, you're gonna get better the next time. And what I realize that oftentimes we make decisions based on our safety and security, right? We think about being on a tight wire rope and the netting below us. But I think that the reality of it is that once you try something, you test your might and you see what kind of fortitude your soul has, the net sort of disappears. And you realize that after I started and ran Beefy Media and then I joined PlayStation, I'd done that once. So I was able to, at PlayStation, make decisions not fearful of my job. I actually challenged the CEO, Jack Trenton, at the start. I said, you know, if this doesn't go well, you can fire me very publicly, and I'm okay with it. Because I think the only way to really impact and empower is to model that as well. And I think living behind the decisions that you make and being responsible for them is super critical too.
Would you say that you know, being true to yourself then is a quality that maybe that you have, that you find important, but that people should consider as well?
Yeah, I absolutely think so. I think if you're always honest and you're always true to yourself, and then that sort of like transcends each interaction, each relationship. You know, going to shows and meeting new people and interacting with other developers and being kind and being compassionate and being empathetic and trying to help them along the way, right? Not trying to be like, hey, I'm trying to sell a thing, but instead like, what do you need right now? Or how's, you know, what kind of things could I help with in your career? Oftentimes it's just paying it forward. I had a huge blessing when I was at EA, my first QA job in the industry in the late 90s, that our GM, Glenn Wong, took a shine. I did a presentation one time. He's like, I'd like to meet with you every quarter. So I'm like an assistant producer QA guy, or assistant QA lead that's meeting with the GM of a studio, and he's spending time with me, and I'm like, this is so weird that he's talking to me, right? Like, isn't he running a massive business? And so now I realize that special time, so I'll do open office hours oftentimes at all our different studio locations. Or if somebody pings me out of the blue and says, hey, I'm a student, I'd really like to figure out my path, I'm like, let's do an hour-long Zoom and chat about what you want to do and where you want to go. Because I realize the gift that I was given is something that as leaders in our industry, we should be passing forward, because it's the least we can do. And by the way, most of us are usually in this industry for the right reason, which is we love awesome games and we love amazing people. So I think the least we can do is pay it forward a little bit and give it to the next generation.
And how should this next generation think about success in this industry?
I think it's about just being proud of the work that you do and the people that you're working with, right? I think, you know, anyone that thinks, you know, we have one of these guys at the studio, Nate, who has these amazing, he has these lessons of game development. And one of the ones he has is the worst thing that can happen to a first-time developer is their game is successful, because then they might think they had something to do with it.
Yeah.
And I love that saying because, you know, it is the RNG factor in any success game is just off the charts. And so I think if you're putting your heart and soul into everything and putting it out there into the world, some people see it, some people might not see it. But the pride that you have and the team that you built and the thing that you built is no one can ever steal that from you or take that from you. So as long as you're doing that each time you go, the minute that you stop doing that, you're like, why are we even doing this? Is this just for someone else or telling us what to do or got to chase these metrics or whatever? Then oftentimes your heart can get lost in it. So I think it's important to just be true to yourself, to the people around you, and make cool stuff, right?
Yeah. And what does success mean to you then?
You know, it was interesting on the previous talk about legacy. It's just, to me, it's just, I want the industry to be as healthy as it can be and be supportive to the people around me. And whether that's the employees at Iron Galaxy or first-time developers or advice to publishers, I think, to me, success is just making sure that people feel supported and have a positive reaction to your interaction. Hopefully, you can help and pay it forward.
Yeah. So we've got only about 5 minutes left, so I want to sort of do a little crystal ball gazing here.
Oh, here we go.
Get your thoughts on a few things.
In the future.
In the future. 10 years from now, so where do you think the industry is going to be? Let's also just put this in perspective. 10 years ago, we had billion-dollar acquisitions of Oculus.
Okay.
Minecraft was acquired about 10 years ago. We had the thriving platforms was Facebook,
yeah,
and Kickstarter, and free-to-play was where every game was going to go.
Yeah.
I think several of those things are not true anymore.
Sure. They're true in the moment until they're not true 6 months later.
Yes. Where do you think we will be, and what do you hope the industry will look like in 10 years?
Well, I mean, I hope that just more access to building cool stuff faster, I think is really awesome that I like to see, like just the proliferation of and access to tools and price points of those things going down. I'm super bullish personally on augmented reality. Like I think the idea of sitting at a table with friends and us being able to play a Diablo or an Elden Ring at a table, so we're physically together, but we're sort of playing it. I think that the idea of like once the price point gets down, I personally think that AR could transform the way that education works. I think right now education is still these massive textbooks, and if I watch my kids' attention span, thanks to TikTok, which I introduced them to, so I'm part of the problem. You know, they're thinking differently. Their minds are being rewired, and so how do we sort of follow them and allow them to learn and evolve more quickly? And I think that interactivity. But I think the most important thing, though, and I think this is part of what COVID taught us, is that in-person part of it is so important to feeling connected to other people in real life. And that's why I love to see the proliferation of these sort of VR clubs that you can go in and play games with your friends. You know, it's like a new school arcade. I think that stuff's really important. So playing together is I think, hopefully a big part of the future.
Yeah. And we've seen a lot of challenges over the last 10 years as well. Gamergate was part of this.
Yeah.
Do you think the industry is improving? Have you seen improvements through the last 10 years, and do you think we're on a trajectory that gives you hope?
I think the internet's going to internet always, right? I think the haters they hate us because they ain't us. I think it's that's always going to be true, and I think that's the sad part of social media. I think the ability to be mean and be cruel. I remember one time, you know, I was doing the presentations at E3, and I would mistakenly read the comments. Like I always tell people not to read the comments, and yet I'd be like, "You look like a fat Ellen DeGeneres on stage, Adam." And I'm like, "What are you coming at me like that?" But I remember one time I actually messaged a person that was like coming after me on Twitter and being super hateful. I actually, in their Twitter bio, they had their work email.
No way.
So I sent them work email from my work email. And I said, hey, with the screen caps of the tweets, and I just say, hey, listen, I'm a guy that works at a company that loves games and tries my best every day. And I'm sorry that you don't like what you're doing or what I'm doing, but, you know, I think sometimes the way is just to have a conversation and not just, you know, throw water balloons. And it was so funny because, like, he wrote back with this massive, massive letter about his own mental health issues and what he's been going through. And then 45 minutes later was like, do you guys have any internships open? And it was such a perfect, like, and I left him unread, you know what I mean? Like, it's that part of, you know, there's real human beings at the other side of it. And so I think it's important for us to be supportive of one another when we see that happening. It's really easy for us to get all caught up in the zeitgeist of like, can you believe they did that? And then when my team often asks me, they're like, why do you think that happened? And I was like, get the whiteboard out. I'm like, okay, so here's why the publisher probably said, here's exactly the reaction is, here's this thing that they had to integrate, and here, da-da-da, and here's what happened. And so you don't get to think in the moment a lot of times when these decisions get made of what the impact's gonna be 6 layers down. But then when it happens, you're like, oh, they're idiots. How could they have seen this coming, not seen this coming? So I think empathy, compassion, and just trying to be supportive and just don't try to tear down other stuff. Just boost cool shit. If you see stuff you love, if someone's doing great stuff, someone's wearing a dope shirt or has an awesome hairdo, compliment them for that, and sort of build on the positivity versus being like, I can't believe that new show came out isn't true to the canon. Can you believe it, right? Instead say, hey, like I've been watching Fallout with my son, and we're having the best time watching the show together. He's never played any games, and yet he's inspired by the world that they built. And then he's like, Dad, I want to play more games with you. I'm like, boom, let's do that, right? So how do we build and be more positive to one another instead of drag each other down? So,
wow, very inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. We're out of time now. I will offer to everyone to take you up on the offer to reach out to you directly if they want to pick your brain on things more, get some guidance if they're going through something. I can attest that you are a very giving person with your time. So thank you very much for being open with us and sharing your thoughts. And thank you all for coming and listening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Wow.
All right. All right.
What a great talk, guys. Really great talk. So this will be a pause in 50 minutes, and I'll see you soon.